Hey everybody, and welcome to part 3 of my thoughts on the Allies expansion. So for this video we're going to be going over the Allies, what the expansion is named after. So these are landscape cards, but they do not actually fall into the normal random chance of drawing one of these. Instead, as long as your kingdom has one or more liaisons, then you just add an ally and it is strictly on top of everything else. And your players start with one favour token, and this basically explains what favour tokens are going to do this game. There is always only exactly one of these out. There are 23 of them, which is kind of a lot, actually, so let's try and run through these. So, Architects Guild, this is the Haggler ally, is basically the way I think of it. So it's got the Haggler effect, where when you gain a card, you may gain a cheaper non-victory card, but it costs you 2 favours to do this. It is also a little bit different from Haggler in the fact that this sort of chains off of itself if you have enough favours. So if I gain a province, I can spend 2 favours to gain a gold, but then I can immediately spend 2 favours again to get something cheaper than the gold, like a 5 cost, and spend another 2 favours to get a 4 cost, and so on and so on. It is worth noting that Guildmaster, of course, gains favours when you gain a card, so this gets very, very cheap with Guildmaster. In fact, if you have 2 Guildmasters in play, or you played Throne Room on a Guildmaster, this immediately gives you the favours back again, because you get 2 when you gain a card, so you can just pretty much always, whenever you gain a card, you just take this chain as far as you need to. So the Haggler effect is normally pretty good. So this is pretty good as well. It's just gaining lots of cards, and you get to gain pretty expensive cards with it as well. If you can hold off on favours until you're able to gain, if you want golds, you can get them with your province, or you get 5 cost cards. You could be worth buying gold because you get a good 5 cost with it as well. Generally this is pretty good, and it's a good reason to want to specifically go for favours, because this is just very, very powerful gaining essentially, which is a good effect to have. Of course, it doesn't get you victory cards like Duchy and all, but it'd be bonkers if it did, really. So yeah, overall I'd say this one's quite strong, and there's a lot of cases where I would buy liaisons just to trigger this. I guess it's a bit awkward with Sycophant in a way, but it is worth noting you could actually technically gain a Sycophant with this and immediately get the favours back in a normal circumstance, but how many Sycophants do you want, really? But this one is overall quite nice, I think. A pretty powerful ally when it comes out. Because it costs 2 favours, you don't get to do it straight away. You do actually have to buy a liaison to trigger this effect. Band of Nomads, this one has not really been quite as useful, I think. So what this does, when you gain a card costing 3 or more, you may spend a favour for either +1 card or +1 action or +1 buy. So of course +1 card and +1 action are not necessarily very good in the buy phase a lot of the time. So that means that these are sort of buy tokens if you're buying cards. Now, you can make use of +card and +action if you have mid-turn gaining, so you got workshop-style cards, or treasure gainers, and they can be fine then. But, really, this, a lot of the time, I would say this is just a +buy token, and the problem is that sometimes you already have forms of +buy. Maybe your village is workers' village, and then do you really need more +buy? Not really. And in cases like that, this ally just sort of doesn't really do anything, I think. I've certainly had games where this basically did nothing that I really cared about. So I think this ally isn't necessarily that great. Do you want to buy stuff like Underling to stack up +buys and stuff? Maybe not. The fact that you can't use it to drain the estate pile, stack up favours and drain estates, sort of also puts a dampening on its usage. You can't use it to pile out cheap piles either. You can't just go for all the Sycophants or the baubles. In fact, maybe the reason why this is, just thinking about it, maybe the reason why this is gain a card costing 3 or more is so that you specifically can't just immediately gain all the Sycophants. No, because you still got to spend money on them, right? I suppose it's an infinite source of +buy if you have multiple Guildmasters in play and you bought copper otherwise, So, yeah, I mean, this one's only okay. I suppose it's nice to make your workshops non-terminal, but you do have to get the favour from somewhere, and sometimes sometimes that's a problem with some liaisons. You have to work for your favours, and really like just a more standard form of like plus buy, or like get a village to deal with your workshop, right? Like make that the first card you get with it. So Band of Nomads not very good, I think, myself. But, you know, it has niche applications where you got to use it for like plus buy, and you got to consider that then. The rest of the kingdom, like very dependent on it, but I've definitely seen cases where you just don't care about Band of Nomads. Cave Dwellers, this is one where I consider the ally to be sort of more of a bonus in a way. So what does it do? At the start of your turn, you may spend a favour to discard a card, then draw a card, repeat as desired. So it lets you sift past very specific cards, like individual cards in your hand, to try and draw up another one instead. You could do that as many times as you want with favours. So, you know, this is an okay effect. There's going to be a bunch of times, like at the start of the game, where maybe it seems that useful. Later on, maybe it's not so great. You try and like save dud hands by like spending a load of favours, but generally I find this is one where like maybe I start stacking up favours because I've bought some liaison and it just happens to be giving me favours. Like maybe I get some with bauble or something, and then at some point it's like, oh no, you know, it looks like my hand might not be so great, so I just start cycling out the bad cards and hope to find another one. I guess with your starting favour, this does have like some potential use at the start of the game. I'm not sure how good it necessarily is. Like, let's say you have 4 and then 3. You could technically discard an estate on your 3 hand to try and like bump it up to a 4, and I guess you have a small chance that you might then see the card that you bought on turn 1 as well. You know, is that good? You do create a small shuffle, you pretty much see your new card on turn 1 most of the time in that case. Like, is that actually good? I mean, it's okay, but yeah, like this is one where it's just like the favour tokens just sort of make a nice bonus, I suppose. Really, you don't want to be relying on this. It's just like smoothing out randomness, and you can sort of not need this by just getting lucky, I guess, but you know, that you can't rely on that obviously. But it's, you know, how much is it doing for you? Well, if you trash a lot of your bad cards, then hopefully you never really need this. But you know, I take it when I get it. I find I like stack up favours until I need them, and then I like just drain them all, like hoping to find a good enough hand. Really, it's all right, Cave Dwellers. Certainly use it. City State, when you gain an action card during your turn, you may spend 2 favours to play it. So it's 2 favours for the Innovation Project from Renaissance. You know, how good is playing an action when you gain it? So that can be really nice for like workshop stuff again, like some of the other ones like Band of Nomads, but in terms of in your buy phase, like most of your gains are going to be buying cards, and there are some action cards that really aren't very good at all when you buy them. Like, you wouldn't immediately play a village like after buying it in the buy phase, so that can be good to like immediately get some payload going. Like maybe you now need some economy and you buy like a bandit, and then you can just like immediately get your gold straight away or something. Like that's fine, I guess. This again, it sort of feels like one where it really is boosted by having specific cards that enable it. It can be really powerful and sometimes quite unfortunate if you have Importer as your liaison, because you get to immediately play your turn 1 buy, and that could be something like the only, you know, there's also Student, and the only trashing is Student or something, and then you just immediately play it and rotate it away, and then player 2 never actually gets a chance to do any trashing this game. You know, that sort of thing can happen. So I mean, this is fine. How many times are you going to be buying a card that you do want to play immediately? That is sort of what you've got to try and figure out to understand how good favours are going to be. If you're going to be getting a lot of such cards, and I'm trying to think of a sort of a deck where you would actually do that, and I'm not sure. You would want a lot of favours, but otherwise, you know, this is something where I think I'm not sort of using it a bunch of the time until like something just happens to come up where it's like, oh, actually, this is now worth spending 2 favours on. So it sort of feels like a bit of a minor speed up bonus in that case, but I'm pretty sure there are some particularly powerful instances of this. Like, I think the workshops or the gaining mid-turn, like you artisan to gain a laboratory and you immediately play it, like that sort of thing. Like, and that makes like the artisan non-terminal as well. I guess in that regard, it's the more expensive Band of Nomads. Not really, you are playing the card, but you are getting like the free action play from this as well. So I think it's more powerful in that regard. But yeah, if there's no workshop, I don't think you really get that many favours for this, and it's only okay. But when there is, this could actually be quite good. You'd probably get like underlings to try and support this, I suppose. Yeah, like it's very card dependent, unfortunately. So how much can you say on it? Because the kingdom matters so much. But yeah, in my experience, it's either it's okay or you're getting a lot of favours for it, I suppose. Coastal Haven, this is like save favour form, the event from Adventures. So when you discard your hand in cleanup, you may spend any number of favours to keep that many cards for next turn. So it's important that if you want to save a card, it has to have been discarded from your hand in cleanup. It means you couldn't have played it. So in that case, it really is like save. But you can save multiple cards. So right at the start of the game, this has value in, like, for example, you can make victory cards miss the shuffle. So on turn 2, you can just have an estate that was in your hand just not basically be in the next shuffle, which is quite nice. But it's also nice to do things like open with 2 terminals if you think you're going to do that. You can sort of save yourself from a terminal collision by like saving one of the cards. Long term, if you're able to actually upkeep a regular number of favours, you can like consistently just make victory cards always miss the shuffle. Like those provinces, you never actually have to draw them. And that's pretty good. Note that just like save, it does leave you with a big hand size between turns, which is sometimes a problem if there's like a discard attack. I think that like in a game with Militia, Coastal Haven, you can still make victory cards miss the shuffle. You just can't make them miss as often, right? Like you're just at risk of being Militia attacked and then they leave your hand. And so that means you can't really use it to save good things, but you can use it to save bad things, just to miss shuffles. So this has got some general utility, I suppose. Like, again, it's another one that I guess it kind of feels a bit like a bonus sometimes. You just sort of get favours. If you do, then, this is nice. But I sort of don't necessarily go out of my way for favours. I guess I haven't really had a game where I specifically try to get a lot of favours to constantly keep victory cards out of my hand. But if I had something really good like Guildmaster to get a lot of favours, then I could probably see that actually being quite decent as an option sometimes. But it is kind of expensive on favours to do that, especially if you want to do that every single turn. So, yeah, this is fine as an ally. Like, it's just a nice bonus, I think, overall. Don't, sleep on the whole resolving terminal collision stuff as well if you're not having like a deck drawing engine. And I suppose there's money smoothing benefits, but I don't know how good like favours are generally in less of an engine-y, like a more sloggy context. Just it's harder and slower to get favours, so there's less value in necessarily going for them then. But yeah, Coastal Haven is fine as an ally. Circle of Witches I do think is kind of weak for an ally, so after playing a liaison you may spend 3 favours to have each other player gain a curse. So the problem with this is that this is really, really slow junker. Yes, it does give your opponents curses, but it takes a long time sometimes to get enough favours to do that. How good is junking if you're only ever going to do it 3 times in the span of a game, right? Like, and if the liaison is student, then they're just going to trash the curse, right? You'd still give out curses as soon as you can. I suppose this is more impactful the more players there are, because there's going to be more curses being thrown about. But like generally, like there's a bunch of liaisons that basically strictly limit the number of favours you're going to get per player. So like importer, everyone gets 5. Student, everyone might get up to like 7 or 8. Like in total across the game. And that just means that there's just barely any curses going out. So this one's not that exciting, like particularly with importers, your only liaison, like you buy importer, you give out a curse the first time you play it, that's it. Like, wow, one curse, who cares? I mean, it's not nothing, but this one doesn't do that much, I think. Think about, like, for example, underling. Is it worth buying 3 underlings to give out a curse every turn? That's quite a big investment, right, to get there. And over time, those do add up. So I'm not going to say that that's nothing. And I suppose Guildmaster gives you enough favours sometimes. Like if it's giving you multiple favours per turn, then actually that starts to be worth it. But I think the weaker liaisons just don't really care about this ally that much. Like they struggle to make all that good use of it, and it doesn't really have much impact. So either you've got to just like incidentally get a lot of favours for this to be good. Like you've really got to go in on lots of favours. Yeah, and it just feels very expensive compared to like normal junkers, I suppose, where you buy like 1 card and then you're giving out like multiple junk over the course of the game every time. Whereas with this, you've got to be playing a lot of liaisons to actually get the similar effect. So, not been too impressed by Circle of Witches in practice. It is worth noting, I suppose, I haven't got as much experience with each individual ally as I do with the cards because you just don't see them that often. Right, like even if only allies is your expansion, you won't actually get an ally in every game because some games won't have liaisons. And then when you do, like you need to play at least 23 games just to see each ally once. Right, that's a lot of games. So maybe I'm sort of lacking a little bit in the experience on these ones, but trying to give the best assessment that I can. But it's worth keeping that in mind. Crafters Guild. At the start of your turn, you may spend 2 favours to gain a card costing up to 4 onto your deck. So this is the Workshop ally, but it does top deck, so it's more like Armory from Dark Ages. Is that the Workshop in Dark Ages, I think? So the card goes on top of your deck, and that's pretty good. Just like the other ones that gain cards, 2 favours to gain a card like Architects Guild. It's pretty reasonable trade-off, gaining's pretty good. And this one's also nice a bit from a reliability perspective. I would advise cantrips if they're available in this, like maybe focus like getting those skirmishers or even some couriers, because what you would really like is to have a look at your starting hand and see, is there any card that I really need? Like maybe you've got a terminal draw card, but you don't have a village. And it's really, really nice to be able to just pick up a village with Crafters Guild and then play something that draws you that village, right? Because the card doesn't go into your hand. You have to draw it. So you really need something that's able to get you that far first. And it's nice to be able to pick up those cards that are generally useful when you need them. Now, if you can generate enough favours, do bear in mind that this can only be done once per turn, and so you only ever at most need 2 favours per turn. There's no point in ever going above that. And when you can generate them consistently, you can use this to just start picking up all sorts of things as well. I guess it's not so nice to pick up estates with it because you do top deck them, but yeah, gaining cards is good. What can I say? And it's nice to be able to gain lots and lots of extra cards, I suppose, if you can get the favours. So this is another one where I would probably actually go out of my way to make sure I pick up liaisons to get favours. But the amount that you actually need is somewhat limited, I suppose, compared to some others because of the restriction of only once per turn on this. But I think this one's pretty good. Actually, there are certain things you really don't want to top deck and you have no choice, but oh well, that's, you just got to deal with that. Lots of good reliable draws, very nice for this, I suppose. Desert Guides. Well, this is the guide card from Adventures. So at the start of your turn, you may spend a favour to discard your hand and draw 5 cards. Repeat as desired. So this can actually be a lot of guides. It is worth noting all the things that apply to guide apply here, so it can, sort of undo discard attacks, which is pretty nice. You can, of course, if you've got enough favours, you can just keep playing this over and over until you draw a good card. This is more powerful than guide, I think, generally. With guide, what happens is that it sort of like just sits around and then maybe you need it. I've certainly had games where I buy a guide early on and then I literally never call it at any time. But what's nice about this is that most liaison sources are going to be like reusable, or if not, like they give you multiple, and you can just like slowly start stacking up favors over the game until you really, really need this. And like particularly towards the end of the game, if you really need like a particularly good hand, you might have just stacked up a bunch of favors and you can just keep re-rolling your hand over and over in the hope that you finally get a really good card. That can be powerful, just a late game like mass re-roll until you get a hand that's basically really good, hopefully. Because, you can discard and draw, like churn through your deck quite a lot with this if you need to. But sort of like guide in and of itself, like this is sort of dud prevention, really. If your hand seems good enough, you might not want to pitch it. It's not like Cave Dwellers where you just get to focus on pitching the bad cards and leave all the good ones in your hand. You do have to pitch your entire hand here. So in my experience, this is more of a bonus like type ally. I don't really go out of my way necessarily to get a lot of favors. Just sometimes you're going to get some favors, or it's worth like, one of your terminal draw cards, you might as well make it emissary in the hope that maybe you do. There is value in the favors with a lot of these, but I don't think I want to spend too many resources on liaisons to get this. It depends, but, just one liaison can sometimes stack you up a number of favors over the course of the game, and that's really enough. Like, how often do you really call this? If your deck is that unreliable, you've probably got bigger problems than you're not getting enough favors for, like, random desert guides, right? And just, like, keep re-rolling in the hope you get super lucky, right? You've got to still build a good deck, right? You can't just re-roll constantly on a bad deck, because all your re-rolls are going to be bad. Yeah, so the desert guides, it's fine. It's like a bonus one. I don't go out of my way for it, I suppose. This one is the difficult one. Whoops, wrong button. Family of Inventors. Man, what do you make of this one? I'm actually not sure. I haven't had a chance to play with this one much, and it seems really difficult. So at the start of your buy phase, you may put a favor token you have on a non-victory supply pile. Cards cost one less per favor token on their piles. So what makes this one particularly weird and difficult to me? Someone's got to get the favors. You'll start with one, but someone's going to be buying a liaison like Underling or something in order to get these favors that make cards cheaper, but everyone gets the benefit, right? And sometimes I'm wondering, how much do you actually want to be the guy doing that? Why should you spend resources on helping out everyone? And I'm not really sure. I am starting to wonder a little bit if sometimes Family of Inventors, the best thing to do is to just not engage in it, right? Certainly, for sure, if you have a plan to do it, you can start to prepare your deck under the fact that you hope to make more advantage of this than your opponent. So generally plus buys are really good with this. So if you have a nice spammable source of plus buy, maybe the plan is that you buy a liaison and you start buying cards that give plus buy, and you hope to really reduce the cost of a very good pile, and that you get to get most of them as a result of simply having more buys, right? And so you can just mass purchase them when they get down to 1 or 0 cost. But if your opponent sees you getting the liaison, well, it's better that they sort of don't and they just pick up the buys instead anyway, and then they get the same benefit, but they were able to spend more resources on the buys or something. You see, that's sort of what confuses me here. I haven't worked out in my mind yet how good is it to actually engage with this. Well, for sure you spend your starting token, right? Because it's free, but I don't know so much how much I even want to gain some liaisons to work on this. There are other things that you can do as well. There are cards that do rely on cost, and you can either make them better or completely screw them over with this as well. So you can slap this on Artisan, and now artisans can gain artisans, but everyone knows this and everyone gets to do it. Things that I found particularly sneaky, don't spend your starting favor. If there's something like remodel on the board, you can wait until your opponent gets a remodel and they're looking to remodel golds into provinces, and then you just put this on gold, and now that doesn't work anymore. right? You can completely screw over that cost-relevant trashing in that way. Other things, although it's a lot more difficult to do it, like if you do have a way of gaining a lot of favours, you can, over time, like make cards cost 0 so that like stonemason can't overpay for them. Or if you have, for example, a card like falconer, what you can do with this is this only gains cards costing less than this. So you can like put your token on falconer, and now it can only gain cards costing up to 3 rather than cards costing up to 4. And you can just, if your opponent gets a falconer, you can just keep putting tokens on this maybe. So I think when there are cards that actually care about the cost of other cards, sometimes it can feel worth it to get more liaisons just to basically play what I call like aggressive family of inventors. Your aim is to cause damage to your opponent rather than because you actually want cheaper cards, really. But of course, I suppose your opponent should know that you can do that as well. And as a result, the question is, if family of inventors is around, should you just steer clear of cost-relevant cards? Like cards that care about the cost of others, like just don't get them, and then there is none of that aggressive like screwing over to be had. I don't know. I just have to play with this one more, but it's hard to find each ally a lot, right? Like especially if you're doing random games, man, it just never shows up, right? I've barely had any games with this one, but I've thought about it a bit, and yeah, it seems tricky. Like at first, you see it, you just play it, you get the favours, cards come really cheap, and then whiz, the game goes on, but then afterwards it's like, well, should I have just not, spent the resources to engage in that? I don't know. We'll see. This one's very difficult to gauge. There's nothing else quite like it, really. So, I don't know. It's the fact that, it applies on other players' turns. That's the crazy bit. Fellowship of Scribes. After playing an action, if you have 4 or fewer cards in hand, you may spend a favour for +1 card. So this one is, of course, significantly more useful in some kingdoms than it is on others. I've had kingdoms where you basically, during your action phase, you never drop below 4 cards in hand. And in that sort of case, Fellowship of Scribes literally does nothing, right? So you do get the kingdoms where this has no impact at all. You don't even spend your starting favour. Having said that, or at least you might spend your starting favour, but it's because you opened, Swindler or something, and so you played that as your only terminal once, and and then after that you're expecting to do a village torturer engine or something, I don't know, and then you're never going below 4 hands, below a 5 card hand, after that. But, I have also played games like, in my first video I was talking about one that had Innkeeper and Diplomat, and I was using Fellowship of Scribes to keep drawing through my deck in that case. In those sort of decks that are kind of draw to X style thing, Fellowship of Scribes can be a really nice source of extra card draw. Plus card is pretty good. So what is effectively a plus card token sounds pretty good, actually. But the thing with this is that it's actually quite hard sometimes to spend a lot of cards on this. The one that stands out, as I mentioned in the last video, is Student. You can turn Student sort of into Chapel in a way when this is on the kingdom. Student just becomes really, really fast at trashing, basically. This one's very kingdom dependent, I guess. And it's hard to spend too many favours on this, but certainly it's very good. And it's worth going in for the liaisons when this looks like a kingdom where this is going to work. Right, you want cards like Festival and so on, the cards that normally work well with Draw to X. And, you won't be getting enough favours to turn every festival into a cantrip, right? That's just not really going to happen a lot of the time. But, you can get value out of this. But I have also seen games where you just don't at all. But I think this is pretty good. When it's good, this is a very, very good ally. It's pretty strong. It can be. Forest Dwellers. At the start of your turn, you may spend a favour to look at the top 3 cards of your deck, discard any number, and put the rest back in any order. So this one for me is very squarely in the realm of bonus. I do not generally go out of my way to do this. You only get to spend 1 favour per turn, so you don't really want a lot of favours from this. So just having the occasional favour now and then, it works out just fine. There will certainly be some turns where this is more useful than others, and of course there are some cards where you might just be able to take advantage of just looking ahead. Like if you drew a Wishing Well into your hand, well, you can guarantee that it succeeds by spending a favour on that turn, right? And you just wait to spend the favours until then. And, sometimes this will discard estates for you. Is this worth spending on turn 1 to try and, pitch estates out of your turn 2? Well, maybe it's better instead to play it at the start of turn 2 and basically get a good shuffle, like a really small one that guarantees that you see the card that you bought on turn 1, on turn 3. That can be pretty good as well. Like if you open Chapel on turn 1 and then turn 2 you spend your starting favour to try and maximise the number of estates and with the Chapel that you hit on turn 3, while also having a 5-card hand so that you guarantee that you shuffle it again. That sort of thing is pretty good for this, I would say. The fact that you've got the flexibility on how many cards that you discard, the rearranging, but, with 1 spend per turn, and it only looks at the next 3, so it's only a very small portion of your deck that hopefully you'll be drawing through. I think this has somewhat limited use, so this one is squarely in, like Cave Dwellers, it feels a little bit like, but not really, right? I guess it's a little bit worse than Cave Dwellers, I think, and you're also very limited on how many you spend. So this is a fairly low down ally for me, I think, in terms of importance. But for sure, I'm happy to occasionally have the odd favour through this, right? For sure. Gang of Pickpockets, I think this one is very cool, but I can't really say after playing with it a lot that it's necessarily very good, unfortunately. At the start of your turn, discard down to 4 cards in hand unless you spend a favour. Well, sometimes that literally just doesn't matter. This is going to discard an estate out of my hand. Wow, fine, I don't care. Especially at the start of the turn, if you have a 3-4 split, I'm happy to let it just discard every turn, right, on those 2 starting turns. Really, the starting favour is useful when you get a 5-2 or a 2-5. You don't have to lose the 5. But, I mean, this, it's you only spend at maximum 1 favour per turn, and a lot of turns you don't really care to spend a favour on it because it's fine to hit the discard attack. Sometimes this is actually useful, the discard attack. It helps activate your diplomat. Great, you're never spending a favour in that case, at least after a certain point. And, sometimes maybe there's a discard attack like militia. Well, it's less valuable now, but that will start you already at lower than 4 cards on, so you don't even get the chance to spend a favour, right? And then favours just don't matter. So I would say that this is the least valuable for favours. Liaisons have the lowest value with Gang of Pickpockets, I guess. Having said that, there are certainly some decks where this is actually, you really want the favours because you desperately want to stop this attack. So that's not the case with Duration Draw, because you get to resolve this and then draw a load of cards at the start of your turn. But it's cards where you're expecting to have a lot of cards in your hand when your turn starts. So it could be you're expecting that you're going to play sheepdogs on your opponent's turn, or black cats, or it can be that you have the events like Expedition or Save that just start with bigger hands, or maybe there's Council Room, or there's Lost Cities being bought or something. There are ways in which actually Gang of Pickpockets it can be quite damaging, but at the same time, I've also had a deck where someone activated 3 black cats at the end of the turn, and then they just discarded down to 4 because it didn't matter, because all they could do was buy a province and effectively, they kept golds in their hand and they just bought it. Like, why should they stop the discarding down to 4? It didn't matter because they could only buy 1 card anyway, and they, it was just like sifting then, right? They just got to pick the best 4 cards out of 7 or whatever, and that was enough for what they needed. So, like, even then, it still didn't really matter, gang of pickpockets. So, yeah, I think the concept is very cool. I do like that this exists, but I do have to acknowledge that as far as favour spending goes, this is not really encouraging you to get liaisons at all, really. Well, I guess that's just how it is. But neat, interesting effect that's very novel. That's very cool card, at least. Island folk. So this is probably the single strongest ally out of all of them. We've just gone from like the weakest to the strongest, I guess. At the end of your turn, if the previous turn wasn't yours, you may spend 5 favours to take another turn. Well, extra turns are just very, very good overall, like incredibly powerful, and this is no exception to that at all. It costs a lot of favours, but extra turns over your opponent are just insanely good, right? Like, you want as many favours as you can get with this. Technically, it is limited on the number of favours that you can actually spend, but like, you're sort of just going for all the favours that you can usually, because you can spend quite a lot of favours over the course of the game with this. Now, it is worth noting that if you can consistently trigger island folk or like generate favours, then you actually only need like 2.5 favours per turn, or like 3 in practice. And that is because, when you can trigger island folk at the end of every turn, you are alternating between like normal turns and island folk turns, and that means that you are able to generate the favours for the next island folk across 2 turns. You've got your main turn and your island folk turn to generate up to 5 favours. And so, as long as you can get to that stage, like, the actual amount you need to invest in favours is a lot smaller. Now, if you can't consistently generate them, then the cost goes way up. So if you think about it, saying that you only need 2.5 per turn only works if you have the island folk turn to get the extra favours from. But if you ever miss it for some reason, that is also missing a turn's worth of favour generation, so it takes you longer to like catch up the deficit. So if instead of having 3 favours per turn, you only have 2, when you miss an island folk, like you have 0, you generate 2. That's not enough for an island folk turn. So next time you have your regular turn, you generate another 2. That's still not enough for an island folk turn, right? Like, you just had 1 less favour, but you effectively missed 2 island folk turns in a row instead of like 1, right? So you see how the cost suddenly shoots up if you can't do it. Or should I say, rather, the cost drops significantly if you can be very consistent in your favour generation. You don't really need that many at all. Once you're drawing your deck, that's like, 3 underlings, and like, ta-da, you're done, right? Or maybe even just 1 guild master is sometimes good enough. Pretty crazy, right? So this is just very, very strong, this one. It is worth noting that, you can have things like Voyage that help you also to just extra opportunities to gain favours. That can sometimes be enough to like help out with island folk, because this is generally like an extra turn that is pretty much totally unrestricted, other than the fact that you effectively only get to get 1 of them per regular normal turn that you have. League of Bankers. So this is another one that's very, very cool, but there's a real question over like how good is this? So this one, you just accumulate favours forever. At the start of your buy phase, +1 coin per 4 favours you have, round down. You never spend them. You never lose favours once you've got them with this. So this just grows and grows and grows over time, at least is the theory. But you do need 4 favours every fort in order to get 1 coin at the start of your buy phase. So you need quite a lot of favours in order to start getting significant amounts of money. Now, the truth is that sometimes you don't need that much extra money to be pretty good. Like, in in a big money style situation, like you only really need like an extra 2 coins per turn to actually be very, very consistent with like provincing and stuff. In fact, it turns out that like with underling, like people are suggesting that maybe like underling big money with bankers is actually pretty decent, like because you get a bunch of plays with underling early because you just keep buying it, and because it's not like growing the number of stop cards in your deck, you still shuffle every 2 turns, so you still get to play the underling like every other turn, and that lets you like build up coins from this pretty quickly. And because this triggers at the start of each of your buy phases, it's very useful for things that give you a lot of buy phases. So like there's, of course, Villa and Cavalry, but Voyage as well. This is another thing that works very well with Voyage. You can, enter a Voyage turn. It doesn't really matter if you're spending cards or not, because Bankers is giving you a lot of money. There, of course, are some liaisons like Guildmaster, which let you go bonkers with favour gains, and then Bankers just becomes nuts. Right, like I have heard of people saying they had a game where it literally generated them 8 coins at the start of the buy phase, and they could just like buy a province without actually playing any cards, which is quite funny. Like every Voyage play was a free province, But how often do you see that? I think overall the opinion by other people so far is that Bankers is a little bit weak as an ally. Like it just requires a lot of investment to get anywhere. But like I think the bonus is clear. But the cost is clear as well. Like you just sort of have to say, well, how good is this? But I think this one's pretty decent. I wouldn't over-invest in liaisons, I guess, but this would certainly encourage me to buy like at least one, and then over the span of the game, like as you only just get to 4 favours, it's like having the key artifact, right? But no one can steal it from you, and that's not bad. That is pretty good, and then it has the potential to get even better than that over time as well. Remember, you do only need 3 favours in addition to your starting favour to basically get this for the first time. Then after that, it's every 4 favours, so that's not necessarily that hard to get, right? But you got to watch out, because it does, unless you've got Importer on the the board, it does take a little while to get there until you start seeing any sort of benefit. Now, League of Shopkeepers, like in some ways this can be better or worse than Bankers, I guess. This is one that very strictly limits the number of favours that are useful for you. So you also accumulate them like Bankers. Once you have 5, each liaison you play will give you a coin, and once you have 10, they will also give you an action and a buy in addition to that extra coin. So, we can talk through each liaison and say how good it is, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. Ones that I've noticed are particularly good, like Bauble is guaranteed, goes from a copper to a silver, is pretty good. The real one that's great is Emissary. If you can get up to 10 favours, which can be quite hard with Emissary, actually, it now becomes non-terminal draw that's also giving you coin and a buy, and it's nuts. It's a little bit like the how your deck suddenly switches on when you get Champion, or when you get a Teacher and you put the action token on your terminal draw card, right? You just sort of, you're trying very hard to get these favours, and then all of a sudden, bang, there goes your deck, and now, wow, you're drawing your whole deck suddenly. You can certainly set things up like that. I really don't want to go through them all, but Guildmaster gets very strong with this as well very quickly, because it goes from a terminal gold to a non-terminal 4 with a buy as well. Yikes, and then you just gain favours en masse with it that don't do anything. It's quite funny. But I think all of the liaisons work pretty well with this. I guess Importer is not that exciting, but it's just an extra coin and that's all you get. But it's still decent actually with Importer, right? You still get to buy slightly better cards on the turn you play your Importer, so can't really knock it. I think Shopkeeper's pretty good. I think it's definitely a reason to get liaisons, because you get the effect with every liaison you play. Underlings very quickly become cantrip coins. Well, not very quickly, it actually takes a little while. But then after that, they become villages that give you a buy as well. They're market villages, which is very, very good for 3. Yeah, this is a decent ally. This definitely encourages me to like play a lot of liaisons sometimes. Although, you know, it does depend. Maybe Sycophant doesn't generate quite so nicely with this. You know, because that's not a card you want to really play a lot of, because its normal effect can be quite damaging if you try to do that. But this works really well overall, I would say. This is a pretty good ally. It definitely makes its presence known. I think you do skip it sometimes. You know, it's very liaison dependent, but yeah, it's not too hard a lot of the time to actually get up to the full bonus. Market Towns. At the start of your buy phase, you may spend a favour to play an action card from your hand. Repeat as desired. So this sounds like using favours as like a villager token. It just lets you play action cards, but it's really not the same thing at all. So bear in mind, you could technically use this if you could somehow get enough favours, like you could run an entire engine in your buy phase based off of this, but you're not really going to do that. And the problem is that because you're playing cards in your buy phase, you don't get the value of any plus actions on any cards. So you sort of can't use this necessarily if you like screw up and dud an engine, like you didn't draw your villages fast enough, because not only will it cost you a lot of favours to then play all of your other cards, but like playing the villages isn't really doing anything for you with Market Towns. This is nice early on in the fact that with your starting favour, you can just open with 2 terminals, and then like it doesn't matter if they collide because you just get to play one of them. But generally, if you're hoping that this will like maybe only play the occasional card, it's really good mostly for the same way you would use Toil to play your payloads when you don't have enough village space. That's the sort of thing I find you tend to use Market Towns for. Generally, some cards you don't really want to be playing in your buy phase, but Market Towns has a better bonus than stuff like Toil because you are playing the cards at the start of your buy phase before you've had a chance to play any treasures, and because you haven't bought anything, that means that if I was to like Market Town some draw card, I do actually get to play the treasures that I draw, unlike like if I Toil a smithy and it draws me like 3 silvers, I don't actually get to play them. It's not the case in Market Towns. So this one's pretty good. You know, it's worse than villager tokens, but you know, it has utility. You can certainly be a little bit more aggressive with terminal collisions. Like, in sort of, you think of it sort of in the way that like you buy Patron, right? Like Patron gives you these villager tokens, and you can't really run a deck off of them, but you for sure can use them to like build your deck slightly differently and, you know, not worry about drawing cards dead necessarily, like now and then. You sort of over terminal at least for a little bit potentially, but that's what you get for like buying the Patron. So like here you can like buy the underling of the bauble and you sort of get that sort of value as well out of it, at least for a little while, which is pretty cool. Like, so Market Town's pretty good ally, I think. But it's very hard to judge, I think, sometimes just like how many favours I really need, and you don't really want to be caught out without any favours if you're sort of being a little bit more aggressive. But, you know, it's not a good substitute for like building a properly functioning deck, I guess, is just one I want to clarify there. Mountain Folk. At the start of your turn, you may spend 5 favours for +3 cards. Well, this is really, really expensive. This is a huge number of favours for just 3 cards. Now, that doesn't sound very good, but actually, like, getting 3 card draw for free is actually pretty good. But I do think Mountain Folk feels a little bit overcosted regardless of that. This is not something that you can play reliably or like consistently because it costs too much. Remember, this is technically more expensive than Island Folk because you don't get the extra turn to build the favours back up. So it's very, very hard to be consistent with this. And as such, Mountain Folk, you can't like go for it as a main source of draw, right? It is just a thing where you do get the benefits and maybe it saves you from a dud turn, but in some regards it's worse than Desert Guides at saving you from a dud turn while also costing like 5 times as much. Like, so yeah, I this one, I mean, the thing with allies, because you only ever get one at a time, they're not supposed to be adequately balanced with each other, is important, but this one really is expensive, man. Or so it's felt to me. So, yeah, I can say it's only okay. Like, it's certainly a fact that I'm happy to have when I get a chance to get it, but, you know, it sort of felt like really hard to specifically invest in liaisons just for this, and like you're not really getting the value out of that. So for some regards, it feels to some extent a bit like a bonus ally, right? Like sometimes you get this bonus because you just so happen to be generating favors from something else. Like, and occasionally you then get this bonus and it's like, oh, cool, right? But you sort of bought the liaisons for some other reason. It's like sometimes that's sort of how I sort of feel about this, but maybe I'm overlooking something, but it does seem very expensive. Order of astrologers. When shuffling, you may pick one card per favour you spend to go on top. So like if you buy an underling, this is basically star chart, right? Hold on. Start again. So this is pretty decent as an effect. Like top decking a card every shuffle removes a lot of randomness out of some key cards. If you do a draw to a clean shuffle every turn, then you know it allows you to seed your next hand with like that crucial village that you need or something. What is important here is that if you get more favors, then you get to top deck multiple cards, and sometimes that can be really, really good. Right now, you don't just get to top deck a village, you get to top deck your village and your smithy as well. Right? Whoa! You know, now you're talking. That's going to really help a lot with reliability. Order of astrologers. It can be just used as like the occasional nice bonus, but also it's another one that's really nice to like try and get some consistent favor generation going. If you have an ally that lets you consistently gain favors, like you can start to get very reliable turns, which can be really important here for this, I think. So I do like Order of Astrologers. I think this one's pretty good generally, I would say. Yeah, like, I suppose it's, again, it's one of those ones where, like, what's it really doing? Well, it's just saving you from bad luck, right? Like, you could just get lucky and basically never bother with it, but, you know, it's a card game. Like, the luck's the important part, but, yeah, don't underestimate the value of reliability, I suppose. It is very good to get that. Early on in the game, I mean, you haven't had a chance to get a lot of favours yet, but you normally don't have great stuff that you want to top deck, and you know, the cost of dudding is pretty low on early turns sometimes, so like it gets more valuable as the game goes on, I suppose. But yeah, top decking your engine pieces is great. Do watch out for games where you end up shuffling mid-turn, I suppose. Like, it's not worth really spending this on those necessarily, or maybe it is. Normally, when I'm thinking this, I'm thinking of the fact that, you know, you are basically drawing deck every turn and you're like seeding your next hand, which has a lot of value because you can seed it with cards that you played this turn, unlike with what was it called, a Coastal Haven. Like, you have to have extra engine components that you carry over, not with Order of Astrologers, because you discard the cards in play and then you get to top deck them. So it's a bit more like Scheme in that regards. Well, it's not like Scheme at all when we're talking about, but you can play it like that once you get to like a deck drawing engine, I suppose. Order of Masons. So this one I think is actually really strong, as it turns out. So when shuffling, you may pick up to 2 cards per favour you spend to put in your discard pile. So this one, if you can afford the ongoing cost, which is actually pretty cheap because you get 2 cards per favour, like you can buy victory cards and never see them, right? It's sort of like an ongoing cost to do the equivalent of like exiling. This is the one that I remember talking about, like mid-turn shuffling. Sorry, I was saying something like that in Astrologers, and I caught myself. I was like, wait, what? I actually meant to say it on this, remembering that failed recording that I had and the things I was saying. Yeah, this one you really want to watch out for, like, mid-turn shuffling, because once you let the victory cards in, like, you then have to deal with them. But for this, like, it is really nice to find consistent generation, to just never have to see some cards. Like once you're in your greening phase, or at the very least, like you can generate a load of favors during the game, and then you like just mass spend them towards the end to like keep all these victory cards out every turn. Early on as well, you do get on turn 2 to elect to like pitch 2 estates, and then you now have a 10 card deck again instead of 12, and they don't have like, they've only got 1 estate in it instead of 3. That's really good actually as well, for having really good turn 3s and 4. Or alternatively the coppers if you've got a chapel or something, and you want to trash the estates. But yeah, overall, Order of Masons seems like it's really, really good. If you can get a lot of favours, you can use this to just not really bother with trashing that much anymore, or as the equivalent, like I say, of exiling cards that you don't want to see. Like but there is an expensive ongoing cost, and it depends on the liaison whether you can do that. You can treat this as just the occasional bonus ally, but really, if it's possible to make an engine, then Order of Masons is really, really good for that engine. I find it gives you a lot better reliability than, when you can buy a lot of victory cards and they aren't slowing down your engine. That's really, really good. Victory cards clogging you up and killing your engine is like the main balancing thing of the game. And if you can avoid that, then wow, you're off. Like engines get really, really good because they maintain their power for a longer period of time. So Order of Masons I've found has been quite strong. I think this is a good ally. Peaceful Cult, this is sort of similar than Masons in some regards, in that instead you actually just get the favour once and you literally trash the card instead of holding it out forever. What am I talking about? It's nothing like Masons, but at least it is early on. With Importer, this is like a free donate, really. After your first shuffle, you're down to 5 coppers as starting cards. Wow, you didn't have to buy donate to get that. That's really good. This is sort of like what makes Importer correlated with really fast games, like ones like this. This is another one like, I guess, League of Shopkeepers, where in general you're sort of limited use on how many favours you need. But it's really good if you can to get your trashing from this. Like particularly if the liaison is doing something else for you. What you can do is you can focus on building your deck by getting a liaison, and then some of your trashing you're just sort of getting for free. That's quite nice actually. Of course, the starting favour is always really good regardless. I suppose student already trashes, you can use Peaceful Cult to get rid of the estates while your student trashes the coppers. That's quite nice as well. And then suddenly all of your starting cards are gone, and then you don't care about the fact to not give you favours anymore. Peaceful Cult is just trashing is good really early. Maybe there's curses you want to get rid of later, or ruins, but generally this gets your deck thin very fast a lot of the time. You sort of go for the liaison as soon as you can, really. Use that for trashing. Or maybe there's just other better trashing and you take advantage of the starting favour and then you just ignore liaisons. I can certainly see that as well. Maybe you have Goat, Pixie was there, and you start with Goat, and then you trash an estate on turn 1, and then your Goat just cleans up the rest, and you don't care about favours. For sure I can imagine situations like that arising, but generally I'd say this one's powerful. Get favours straight away if you can, and then, hope that the liaisons are ones that help you build your deck, I guess. Plateau Shepherds, so this is more like a landmark in that all it's doing is giving you points, but this one can be quite strong. When scoring, pair up your favours with your cards. You have costing 2 coins for 2 points per pair. If you played the previews week, you probably recognise the power of Plateau Shepherds combined with Bauble, which it turns out is actually really, really strong. You can just rush baubles and estates, and then hopefully there's some other 2 cost as well, and boom, the game is done, right? That's all you do, and you rush it really fast and you get a load of points. This can be a lot of points. This does make estates effectively the equivalent of duchies if you're willing to get a couple of favours. That's also really strong. It's very easy to gain estates in some circumstances, gain a lot of them very quickly, and if they're as powerful as half a province each, 3 points. Like, wow, that's a lot of points that you can get from this. So this one's hard to ignore, I find. There is, of course, a limit on how many favours that you want, and how many 2-cost cards you can get is really dependent on the kingdom. But if there is any sort of like spammable good 2-cost, like Vagrant, Border Guard, Patrician, like Plateau Shepherds is able to earn you quite a lot of points from that. So yeah, don't ignore this one. Again, the number of favours that you want is very kingdom dependent, and of course the nice thing about this is that you don't spend the favours during the game. They're all relevant only at the end, so you can potentially like just buy an underling at the start, or at least at a point where it feels okay to get one, and then that will just slowly accumulate you favours over the course of the game until you get to the end where then suddenly they're useful. So you don't really have to rush for favours for this one either, and you don't necessarily need to invest that much in liaisons. Like if there are liaisons that give you multiple favours over the course of the game, maybe one is all you need or something. But yeah, it's certainly, I think the liaisons, at least like if there's like one liaison, that liaison usually tends to be pretty good with Plateau Shepherds. I guess there's like Sycophant as well, is also the liaison that costs 2, but I don't know how good like getting a lot of Sycophants is for Plateau Shepherds, but like at least one's got to be fine, right? With all those estates that you have, I guess. Trapper's Lodge, when you gain a card, you may spend a favour to put it onto your deck. This is... I don't know how good this one is. Like, for sure, top decking is a nice effect. It's unfortunate, like, when Bauble is the liaison, because it allows you to top deck every card. You gain that by phase, and then like you don't really need the favours from Bauble either, because you're getting the top decking anyway. There are for sure a lot of cards that you don't want to top deck. Like towards the end of the game, you're buying victory cards. I don't want to top deck those. So this, it sort of wants you to get favours early on, and then all of a sudden the favours like sort of stop being that useful. I guess you can treat it a bit like League of Shopkeepers in that way, that you sort of want a bunch of favours early and then suddenly you don't care that much anymore. But top decking in general, it's nice when you can get it. It is nice at the stage where you're building your deck to immediately top deck those cards. And start playing with them a little bit earlier. Like that can speed you up quite a bit. So this is one, I think it's a little bit better maybe than like just a bonus that you treat it as. You can certainly do that, but like it can be nice to find ways to start getting those tokens straight away. Like you really benefit a lot from getting them as early as possible with this. Of course, you do start the game with one, and yeah, I mean, that can be pretty powerful. Sometimes you can open Chapel and top deck it immediately, right? That sort of thing, which is just a nice benefit that it gives you, even if you ignore liaisons otherwise. But yeah, this one's okay, I guess, overall. It certainly seemed all right when I've had it. Like, certain cards, the engine pieces, you do totally just top deck them when you can, and it's fine, I guess. Probably a little bit better than ones that are just like I see as a bonus, but not that much better, I guess. This is a middle of the road ally, I think. Last one, we're almost there. Woodworkers Guild. At the start of your buy phase, you may spend a favour to trash an action card from your hand. If you did, gain an action card. Well, this is like the advance effect, or like the sort of thing that Animal Fair does. Or it's sort of like a swap almost, but no, it's not a swap because you don't put the card directly to your hand. But if you can get a lot of cheap action cards, then this can convert those into anything at all. That includes like city quarters action cards that cost potion and so on. The thing is that you have to gain the card, you have to draw it, and then you have to wait until your buy phase. So there's no like mid-turn gain and play stuff. Then you trash that intermediary card to finally get the card you want. That is pretty slow. It does take you an extra shuffle to start playing with the card that you actually wanted, and you got to generate the allies as well, the favors as well. Excuse me. Yeah, this one hasn't really seemed that good, to be honest, when I've had it. It does require certain circumstances to be good, and I can certainly see the decks where this is going to be just incredible, right? They for sure will exist, right? The ones where you get to make a good use out of, like, swap, in terms of, like, turning cheap cards into better ones. Like, that's also going to apply here. You know, it lets you get the very expensive cards while not having much economy, so there is sort of value there in when you've got something like Steward as you're trashing, you get to buy some 2-cost card, even if it's like Duchess, and then you get to convert that into a better card when you come along, you know, and those low-value turns aren't wasted. You know, maybe Student is giving you some bad turns and you get to buy, like, those cheap cards. You buy Sycophant, and then you turn the Sycophant into something better, you know. Like, you can do that sort of thing with this. Maybe you get an Underling, and then, like, you might play it, and then the next time round, I guess, you turn it into something else. I don't know. But this hasn't seemed that great. I can certainly see decks, and I've had games, where this hasn't done anything at all, and it just didn't seem worthwhile to, like, trash the action cards, because I was just, like, directly buying the ones that I wanted anyway. So yeah, I would certainly be looking for cheap action cards and, like, plentiful plus buys, so that I can get those cheap action cards in order for this to be good. It is worth noting that you only get to do this once per turn, so it's another one where the actual number of favours that you can spend is pretty limited. So this one's on the lower end, I think. This ally hasn't done that much for me personally, but I can certainly envision the situations in which this ally might be good. It just requires a lot of things to go right in order for this to be useful. You know, it is also the case that sometimes these cards lose their effectiveness, so you can get thin with Chapel, and then you can turn the Chapel into something better with your starting favour. You know, that's nothing to ignore. That's pretty good. That's a great bonus to have. But that's something that's not really encouraging you to get the liaison, right? Like, if the only card you're going to trash is your, like, one trasher card, or, like, a junker when you run out of curses or whatever, like, this is not really adding value to liaisons that much, I find. It is hard to use a lot of favours on this thing, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah, this one hasn't seemed that good for me so far, I guess. Well, I mean, finally did it. That was way more talking than I ever thought it would be when I started on this. I thought it was just going to be like, just be like a 2-hour thing originally, but this is like 3.5 hours. What's my thoughts on the expansion in general? Well, I really like this expansion. This expansion has a lot of very, very good cards in it. They're a lot of fun. I think that the power level is not as high as, like, Renaissance and Menagerie, but that's good because it means that the games are a little bit more interesting, I guess, and a bit more subtle. Like, there's a lot of thinking in this one. There's a lot of choice cards, but also, in general, like, I think the play time, games go on a lot longer when you're playing with a reasonable density of allies cards. The fact that you've got these huge split piles that have 16 cards, and they don't typically tend to empty either. That does a lot to, like, really slow the games down as well. Like, you can build and build and build, and you're not really worried about 3 piling. But yeah, like, the cards are solid on this. Like, some people hate Barbarian, but otherwise, like, the cards are real nice. And, there's a lot of variety in here as well. Like, the liaison's doing different things. Like, there's cool stuff that can happen with that, even though, like, there's a lot of allies. Like, and you don't really see each one that often. Yeah, so overall, I think a very, very good expansion, personally. That's my thought on it. What do you think about it? Well, anyway, thank you for watching this series of bonus videos. Regular videos will resume at some point after this. Probably next... Well, no, I'm busy next week. Maybe not. But yeah, I just thought this was different. Since I'm running this channel, an expansion hasn't come out while I'm running it. So I just thought, this is fine, but it will take a long time to get to actually making in-depth videos on this if I carry on my plan of going through all the oldest expansions first, right? I'll see you in a decade for allies, right? Oh man, what am I doing? Well, Cool. Anyway, if you did watch all of these, like, wow, thank you. This is a lot of content, really, just me rambling in a microphone. My voice really hurts because it's actually been like an extra 3 hours as well that you didn't hear. So this has been like 6.5 hours of talking over 2 days. Wow. I'll see you for next time. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.